And joining me now is the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Let me start with this. You've said that you can continue to investigate while also compiling your report. What does that look like? And is it more for show, or is there do you have some evidence that more investigation is going to happen next week?
Certainly not for show. I mean, there's more work to be done, but at the same time, we've already accumulated quite overwhelming evidence that the president once again sought foreign interference in an election, conditioned official acts, a White House meeting that Ukraine desperately wanted, as well as $400 million of bipartisan taxpayer funding to get these political investigations that he thought would help his reelection. So, we view this as urgent. We have another election in which the president is threatening more foreign interference. But at the same time, there are still other witnesses, other documents that we would like to obtain. But we're not willing to go the months and months and months of rope-a-dope in the courts, which administration would more than love for us to do.
Well, you have somebody right now, Lev Parnas, who, according to his attorney, this is one of these associates of Mr. Giuliani that apparently was always with him on these Ukraine trips and may have been involved in a campaign finance scheme that's being investigated right now. He says he has some things to talk to Congress about. You going to hear from him?
Well, we have already subpoenaed him for documents, and we're in discussions with the Southern District of New York. So we are pursuing it, but at the same time, we'd like to know what the documents have to say before we make a decision about witnesses. This is why we've subpoenaed Pompeo for documents and others for documents. As we saw during the hearings that we had, those documents can be awfully important to knowing the right questions.
You just got some documents, actually, a FOIA investigation, a FOIA request by an outside group. Ended up getting some documents that raised some more questions, that tie Rudy Giuliani, confirmed some phone calls between Rudy Giuliani and the Secretary of State, confirm, and you'd gotten those articles that Giuliani was spreading around from the State Department's IG. So there's more documents, again, more evidence. Well, I mean, I want to put, you have all these open leads. It just seems odd that you're stopping.
Well, we're not.
I mean, look at all these open leads. You have Bolton, you have the energy deal.
It's important to know we're not stopping. But it's also important to know this, Chuck, and you've acknowledged this, and I find this remarkable. The evidence is already overwhelming, right? The evidence is already overwhelming. The question is,
but you're not in a courtroom. You know that. You have a political bar you have to meet.
That's true. That's true. But the fact that Republicans may be derelict in their responsibility doesn't relieve us of our obligation to do our constitutional duty. And we feel an urgency about that. So even as we compile this report, even as we submit evidence to the Judiciary Committee, we're going to continue with our investigation. But we are not going to let the administration stonewalling us stop us. And if people are acknowledging, and I think they're quite right, that the evidence is overwhelming, then you have to ask, what more would be necessary to show Republicans? Indeed, is there anything that could move Republicans?
Well, let me give you one example. Let me give you one example.
They'll do their duty.
Let me give you one example, because it's one that a lot of Republicans are hanging their hat on. That if there is one piece of evidence you have not been able to surface, it is this idea that the president, when did he order that the aid itself was to be withheld as a quid pro quo? You only have Gordon Sondland saying that it was the meeting. It was the meeting, and he assumed it. You don't have the direct. This is how they're hanging their hat on.
No, I realize that.
You could say it's a thin read, but it is a read.
Chuck, let's look at this. First, they hung their hat on there's no evidence of a quid pro quo. Then there was overwhelming evidence of a quid pro quo. Now some are hanging their hat on, well, what's your evidence that the president withheld the military aid? The president's own chief of staff has admitted they withheld the military aid to get this investigation, this crazy DNC server investigation, which is part of a Russian disinformation campaign. The president's own chief of staff. I mean, they seem to be saying, unless Donald Trump writes out, I bribed Ukraine, the evidence will be insufficient. What every juror is told, and I don't think that the Senate is different than a jury here, at least it shouldn't be, is they don't leave their common sense at the door. There was no plausible explanation but one, and that was the president wanted this leverage to get Ukraine to do his political dirty work.
Do you, are you going to be a House impeachment manager?
That'll be up to the Speaker.
That's up to the Speaker. Would you like to be one? Would you like to be one of the prosecutors?
I don't want to get ahead of where we are, which is we haven't even brought up articles, made the decision about articles.
You don't? Is it possible that articles are not filed this year?
I don't want to prejudge the outcome here. I do think the evidence, the facts of what the president did are really not contested. They're largely not contested. That's the remarkable thing. So the question is, knowing the president sought foreign interference in an election, knowing that he conditioned official acts to get political favors, are we prepared to say that that's okay, that's consistent with the duties of the office? And I will say this, members are going to have to think hard about two things. One, the knowledge that if we do nothing, it is very likely the president will do this again. But second, are Republicans prepared to say that they will allow this president and any future president to simply stonewall the Congress and refuse to provide evidence? And if they do, it means that the impeachment clause is a nullity. And more than that, it means that our oversight ability is also a nullity.
I know where you are on the whistleblower and the belief that you really don't need to hear from the whistleblower anymore. But you did pledge that the Intelligence Committee would hear from the whistleblower in some form or another. Are you going to fulfill that pledge?
We had a deep interest in having the whistleblower testify until two things happened. One, we were able to prove everything in the whistleblower complaint with witnesses that had hand information. And second, the president and his allies effectively put that whistleblower's life in danger. The president said the whistleblower and others should be treated as a traitor or a spy, and we ought to use the penalty we used to use for traitors and spies, and that's the death penalty. So here's the thing, Chuck. We don't need the whistleblower's secondhand evidence anymore. It would only serve to endanger this person and to gratify the president's desire for retribution, and that is not a good enough reason to bring in the whistleblower. One
last thing on the Senate trial. Is one of the reasons you're not going to fight to try to, in the courts right now for Bolton, is that you believe there's this theory that's been on, I think, Talking Points memo, a liberal news organization, Josh Marshall. There's a legal theory running around that it's a lot easier to get the Chief Justice to compel John Bolton to testify at a Senate trial than it would be waiting around to get him to Congress. Do you buy to that theory?
I think that may very well be true. Now, people like John Bolton, whose deputies had the courage to come in and testify, are going to have to answer one day why they saved what they knew for a book rather than tell the country when the country needed to know. But I do think that when it comes to documents and witnesses, that if it comes to a trial, and again, we're getting far down the road here, that the Chief Justice will have to make a decision on requests for witnesses and documents. And so I don't envy that job.
He may say that you should be a witness. They may want to call you.
Well, look,
you ready?
If the Senate wants to call me as a witness, then they pretty much made the decision not to take this process seriously. I'm not a fact witness. I was the chairman of one of the committees doing an investigation. I'm not in the shoes of a special counsel. I don't work for the Justice Department. All I can relate is what the witnesses said in deposition and in the open hearings, and that's no reason to call me as a witness.
Adam Schiff, I'm going to leave it there, Chair of the House Intelligence Committee.